So there I was, trying to explain why Vera Kozlov carried a literal sword to Space Military Academy. Not a plasma sword, not an energy blade, an actual, honest-to-physics piece of folded steel that her great-grandmother had wrapped in silk and shipped across 3-star systems. Picture this, Station Nexus 7, the Galactic Military Academy's crown jewel, floating in the middle of nowhere like a chrome-plated donut with delusions of grandeur. Inside, you've got cadets from 47 different species, all learning how to properly obliterate each other with the latest in energy weapon technology. And then there's Vera, the only human in her cohort, polishing a katana like she's planning to duel samurai ghosts. Her bunkmate Thrix thought it was hilarious. 4-armed Zentorians have this thing about efficiency, and watching Vera maintain a weapon that required actual physical effort was apparently peak comedy. Thrix would lounge on her bunk, all 4 hands working on different homework assignments, making comments like, "Why not just carry a rock? Rocks are also ancient Earth technology." But Vera, she'd just smiled that particular human smile that makes other species nervous and keeps sharpening her blade. The problem started when Commander Voss announced partnership duels for the combat assessment. Voss was one of those crystalline beings who literally sparkled when he talked, which would have been impressive if he wasn't also the most condescending instructor in the Academy's history. Picture a walking disco ball with a superiority complex, and you're halfway there. Modern warfare, Voss declared, his prismatic form catching the overhead lights in ways that probably violated several physics laws, requires modern solutions. Energy weapons, plasma technology, refined, elegant tools for civilized beings. Then his faceted gaze fell on Vera's sword rack. Not barbaric relics from primitive worlds. The other cadets snickered, except for Kane Torvik, who didn't snicker because snickering was beneath someone whose family owned half the Corellian system. Kane just smiled, the kind of smile that cost more than most people's education. "Cadet Kozlov," Voss continued, "you'll be partnered with Cadet Torvik for tomorrow's assessment. Perhaps exposure to proper weaponry will expand your limited perspective." Kane's smile got wider. "Don't worry, Commander. I'll make sure she learns something useful." Oh, she was going to learn something all right. They all were. See, what nobody bothered to ask was why a human family would pass down a sword through 6 generations of space travel. What kind of emergency were they preparing for that required keeping a weapon that needed no power source, no ammunition, and could cut through pretty much anything if you knew how to swing it properly? But hey, that's aliens for you. They see something they don't understand and immediately assume it's primitive. Never occurs to them that maybe, just maybe, humans had reasons for the weird stuff they did. Tomorrow's assessment would determine fast-track placement to elite units versus, quote, support roles in resource extraction facilities, which was Academy speak for congratulations. You're now a space janitor on an asteroid mining station where the highlight of your day is arguing with maintenance droids about proper waste disposal protocols. Vera spent that evening like she always did, meditation, blade maintenance, and ignoring Thrix's increasingly creative suggestions about upgrading to weapons that don't require you to get within hugging distance of your enemies. What none of them knew was that tomorrow wouldn't just be about proving human combat effectiveness. Tomorrow, they were all going to discover why some weapons survive civilizations and why sometimes the old ways stick around because they work when nothing else will. But I'm getting ahead of myself. First, Kane had to learn some humility and physics, mostly physics. Combat assessment day arrived with all the pomp and ceremony of a space carnival. The Academy's main arena was packed tighter than a black hole's event horizon, with cadets from every species placing bets on how quickly the human would get vaporized by proper technology. The odds were not in Vera's favor. Shocking, I know. Kane strutted into the arena wearing custom armor that probably cost more than most planets' annual defense budgets, polished chrome with energy-reflective plating, powered joints that hummed with expensive engineering, and a helmet that made him look like the galaxy's most pretentious robot. In his hands, the Torvik family's ancestral plasma rifle, a work of art that could punch through starship hulls, and had probably done so on several occasions. Vera walked in wearing standard academy gear and carrying her sword. The contrast was, shall we say, noticeable. "Ladies, gentlemen, and assorted other configurations," announced the arena's AI, its voice dripping with simulated enthusiasm. "Today's featured match, the advanced Corellian military technology versus, pointed metal?" Even the AI was taking shots. This was going to be good. Commander Voss floated to the center ring, his crystalline form refracting the arena lights into a rainbow that probably violated several species seizure warnings. Standard combat assessment rules apply. First incapacitation or yield determines the winner. Lethal force is discouraged, but accidents happen. Begin when ready. Kane raised his rifle and immediately started charging the plasma chamber. The weapon whined with building energy, casting blue light across his chrome armor. He looked like a god of war having a really good day. "Any last words, Primitive?" he called out, voice amplified by his helmet speakers. Vera just shrugged and drew her sword. The blade caught the arena lights and threw them back in ways that didn't quite make sense. For just a moment it looked like the metal was moving, flowing like liquid starlight. But that was probably just the dramatic lighting. Probably. Kane opened fire. "Now, I need to explain something about plasma rifles. They don't shoot bullets. They don't shoot lasers. They shoot concentrated stellar fire hot enough to turn most materials into their component atoms. The Torvik family rifle could theoretically cut a moon in half if you gave it enough time and ammunition." Vera dodged. Not rolled, not dove. Dodged. Like the laws of physics had personally insulted her family and she was here to settle the score. The plasma bolt sailed past her head close enough to singe her hair, and she was already moving, closing distance with steps that looked suspiciously like dancing. Earth gravity, it turns out, is kind of ridiculous by galactic standards. Humans who grow up in it develop this weird ability to move in ways that don't make sense to species from more reasonable worlds. They're heavier, stronger, and apparently bounce around like demented acrobats when they're not being held down by twice standard gravity. Kane fired again, and again, each shot precise, calculated, absolutely lethal to anything it hit. Vera kept dodging, kept closing distance, and the crowd started making that nervous noise crowds make when reality stops behaving the way they expect. 20 meters. 15. 10. Stay back. Kane shouted, switching his rifle to full automatic. The arena filled with blue death, plasma bolts searing the air hot enough to activate the emergency cooling systems. 5 meters. Vera lunged. Her sword met Kane's energy shield, that lovely little force field that made Corellian nobility untouchable in close combat. The shield was rated to stop small starship weapons. It had never met a properly folded katana wielded by someone whose ancestors had been perfecting the art of cutting things for several thousand years. The blade went through the energy field like it was made of birthday cake and false promises. The crowd went dead silent. Then the sword hit Kane's armor, that beautiful, expensive, theoretically impenetrable chrome masterpiece. The metal parted with a sound like reality sighing in resignation. Not sparks. Not grinding. Just that soft, almost musical whisper of a really good edge doing what it was designed to do. Kane's smug expression, visible through his helmet's faceplate, underwent what I can only describe as a complete existential crisis. You could actually see the moment when his worldview collapsed and reformed around the uncomfortable reality that his family fortune couldn't buy him basic physics. "Impossible," he whispered. Vera smiled and pressed the blade's edge against his throat guard. One more inch of pressure and the assessment would be over in a way that violated several Academy regulations about permanent damage to fellow cadets. "Yield?" she asked politely. That's when the emergency klaxon started screaming. Picture the most annoying sound in the universe. Now imagine it's being broadcast directly into your brain by speakers designed to wake the dead. That's what emergency klaxons sound like when a void kraken latches onto your space station. The arena's lights shifted from dramatic combat assessment to everyone is probably going to die red. Commander Voss's crystalline form flickered like a disco ball having a panic attack, and his voice cracked across 3 octaves as he tried to maintain authority while clearly losing his mind. All cadets report to emergency stations immediately. This is not a drill. I repeat, this is definitely not a drill because we don't have drills for cosmic horror. The crowd forgot all about Vera and Kane's little physics demonstration and started stampeding toward the exits with the kind of enthusiastic panic that only comes from recognizing genuine mortal peril. Thrix appeared at Vera's shoulder, all 4 arms moving in different directions as she simultaneously checked her data pad, helped injured cadets, and gestured wildly at the ceiling. You know what a void kraken is, right? Big space squid with attitude problems. Vera guessed, still holding her sword at Kane's throat because the assessment technically wasn't over yet. Try eldritch horror from the spaces between reality that thinks advanced technology tastes like candy. Thrix's upper left hand was typing furiously on her pad while her lower arms hauled a stunned Glycerian cadet to his feet. They're older than most civilizations, and they really hate anything more complex than a pointed stick. Above them, something that sounded like the universe's largest fingernails on the cosmos's biggest chalkboard suggested the Kraken was trying to tear through the station's hull. Kane, still processing his recent introduction to the sharp end of human metallurgy, looked between Vera's sword and the ceiling. You mean that thing up there is immune to energy weapons? Worse, Thrix said cheerfully. It dissolves them, along with anything else that relies on advanced technology. Your fancy armor? Space dust. Your plasma rifle? Expensive paperweight. The station's defense grid? Currently being converted into cosmic smoothie ingredients. That's when something interesting happened. Vera's sword started humming. Not vibrating. Not resonating. Humming, like it was happy about the situation. The blade grew warm in her hands, and for just a moment, the metal seemed to ripple with patterns that looked almost like writing. Ancient writing. Earth writing. Okay, Vera said slowly, that's new. The sound from above got louder, accompanied by the distinct sensation of gravity doing things gravity wasn't supposed to do. Emergency lighting flickered as whatever passed for the Kraken's digestive system started working on the station's power grid. Commander Voss materialized beside them, his prismatic form now cycling through colors that probably indicated severe psychological distress in crystalline beings. Cadet Kozlov, I'm requisitioning your weapon for emergency defense purposes. You want to borrow my primitive relic? Vera asked with a smile that could have cut glass. The defense grid is offline. Energy weapons are ineffective. And according to historical records, void krakens have one weakness, pre-FTL metallurgy. Voss's voice cracked again. Something about the molecular structure of primitive metals interferes with their reality warping abilities. Kane, meanwhile, was staring at his sliced open armor with the expression of someone whose entire worldview had just been fed through a blender. My family's been collecting the wrong things. What do you mean? Vera asked. We have a whole wing of the estate dedicated to primitive curiosities. Kinetic weapons. Chemical explosives. Things we thought were museum pieces. He looked up at her with something approaching respect. My great-grandfather always said they might be useful someday, but we all thought he was just sentimental. The ceiling chose that moment to develop a hole. Not a neat, circular breach like you'd expect from proper weapons. This was more like reality had gotten bored with being solid and decided to try being a liquid for a while. Through the gap, something that hurt to look at directly writhed with too many dimensions and a serious attitude problem. Vera's sword hummed louder. Right, she said, testing the blade's balance. Anyone else want to find out what great-grandma's stories about this thing being special actually meant? The void kraken squeezed through the reality hole. It had torn in the ceiling like cosmic toothpaste being forced through an interdimensional tube. What emerged defied every law of physics, biology, and good taste that the galaxy had established over the past few million years. Imagine an octopus. Now imagine it's the size of a subway system, exists in 4 dimensions simultaneously, but and is extremely upset about having to deal with three-dimensional beings who insist on having opinions about their own continued existence. Add tentacles that phase in and out of reality, eyes that look like black holes having identity crises, and a mouth that could probably eat a small moon if it was feeling peckish. The Kraken's first order of business was dissolving the arena's weapon racks. Advanced plasma rifles, particle beam generators, and molecular disruptors all turned into glittery space dust the moment those reality-warping tentacles touched them. The cadets holding said weapons experienced what I can only describe as severe technological disappointment. In defensive positions. Commander Voss shouted, which was optimistic considering their weapons were now decorative sparkles floating in the recycled air. Use whatever non-energy equipment you can find. This led to the surreal sight of Galactic Military Academy cadets arming themselves with whatever primitive nonsense they could scavenge from the maintenance lockers. Wrenches. Crowbars. One enterprising Denebian found a mop and was wielding it like it contained the secrets of the universe. Vera stepped forward, her sword now glowing with soft blue light that definitely hadn't been there during the duel. I volunteered to get close enough to test this thing. That's suicide, Kane said, then paused as he processed what he'd just witnessed. Actually, no, that's just human. There's a difference, but I'm not sure what it is. Thrix was busy jury-rigging some kind of improvised launcher from maintenance equipment, her four arms working with the kind of focused efficiency that made Zentorians legendary engineers. If you're going to be the crazy human in this scenario, you'll need cover. What are you building? Vera asked. Kinetic projectile delivery system. Also known as a really big slingshot. Thrix grinned, which was unsettling because Zentorians had too many teeth. Turns out ancient technology works both ways. Kane was digging through an emergency supply locker with the enthusiasm of someone who'd just discovered his family hobbies might actually be useful. Here, he pulled out something that looked like it belonged in a museum. Chemical explosive projectiles. My great-grandfather collected these. Are those bullets? Vera stared at the primitive ammunition. Kinetic penetrators with chemical propellant delivery systems, Kane corrected. We just called them bullets because great-grandfather had a sense of humor. The Kraken, apparently bored with dissolving inanimate objects, turned its attention to the fleeing cadets. A tentacle the size of a freight train swept across the arena, and where it passed, advanced technology simply stopped existing. Personal communicators, data pads, even the emergency lighting fixtures became very expensive glitter. But the tentacle stopped when it hit Vera's sword. Actually stopped. Like it had encountered something it couldn't just wish out of existence. The blade cut through the cosmic horror's appendage with that same soft whisper it had used on Kane's armor, and the Kraken made a sound like reality having a temper tantrum. Well, Vera said, as eldritch ichor that existed in too many dimensions splattered around her, that got its attention. The Kraken's impossible eyes focused on her with the kind of interest usually reserved for things that had just become very personal enemies. More tentacles emerged from spaces that shouldn't have been able to contain them, and gravity started doing creative things that made everyone's inner ear extremely unhappy. It's covering fire. Kane shouted, which would have been more impressive if his covering fire wasn't coming from a weapon that predated faster than light travel. But the bullets worked, punching through tentacles that energy weapons couldn't touch, buying Vera space to move. Thrix's improvised launcher sent chunks of debris flying at velocities that would have made ballistics engineers weep with joy. More tentacles recoiled, and the Kraken's reality-warping abilities seemed less effective against objects that didn't rely on advanced physics to function. Vera danced between writhing appendages, her sword leaving trails of blue light that looked suspiciously like they were writing something in languages that predated galactic civilization. Every cut sent the cosmic horror into greater paroxysms of rage, and the space around them started doing things that made the emergency evacuation procedures look inadequate. But the Kraken was learning. Its next attack came from 6 directions simultaneously, tentacles phasing through solid matter to catch her from angles that shouldn't have existed. That's when Commander Voss did something completely unexpected. He flew directly into the path of one of the tentacles and grabbed it with his crystalline hands. Instead of being dissolved like everything else, his prismatic form started channeling the sword's blue energy, conducting it through his body like a living focusing lens. "Cadet Kozlov," he shouted, his voice now harmonizing with itself in frequencies that made reality sit up and pay attention. "The blade's power can be amplified. Physical contact with compatible crystalline matrices," which was Academy speak for touch the shiny teacher, and let's see what happens. Vera grabbed Voss's outstretched hand. The arena exploded with blue light that tasted like ancient starlight and forgotten civilizations. What happened next was the kind of cosmic light show that usually requires a team of special effects artists and a budget that could buy a small planet. Vera's sword, now amplified through Commander Voss's crystalline matrix, started cutting through reality itself. Not metaphorically. Literally cutting through the fabric of space-time like it was made of cosmic tissue paper and bad intentions. The Void Kraken, which had been having a perfectly pleasant time dissolving advanced technology and terrorizing space cadets, suddenly found itself facing something it hadn't encountered in several billion years, a weapon specifically designed to hurt things that existed outside normal physics. "What is that thing?" Kane shouted over the sound of dimensions being forcibly reorganized. "Family heirloom." Vera called back, slicing through a tentacle that was trying to exist in 7 dimensions simultaneously. The severed appendage fell to the arena floor with a wet sound that made everyone's teeth itch. Great-grandma always said it was special. Thrix, still operating her improvised kinetic launcher with the precision of someone who'd decided that today was not the day to die horribly, managed to keep several tentacles busy with a steady barrage of maintenance equipment traveling at inadvisable velocities. And define special. Well, apparently it can cut holes in reality. The Kraken pulled out what I can only assume were its best tricks. Reality started folding like origami designed by someone with severe psychological issues. Gravity decided to flow upward. The arena's walls began existing in colors that didn't have names and probably shouldn't have been visible to most species' optical organs. But here's the thing about humans and their weird relationship with physics: they're really good at ignoring things that should be impossible. Vera kept fighting like the laws of nature were more like guidelines, and the Kraken's reality warping abilities seemed less effective against someone who'd grown up in Earth's gravity well and learned to treat physics as a personal challenge. Kane, meanwhile, had discovered that his family's collection of primitive curiosities included some genuinely impressive kinetic weapons. Chemical explosive projectiles, it turned out, didn't care about dimensional phase shifting. Bullets traveled in straight lines because that's what bullets did, and if reality wanted to get bent out of shape about it, reality could file a complaint with physics. Commander Voss was conducting energy through his crystalline matrix like a living prism, focusing the sword's power into coherent beams that carved through tentacles and made the Kraken extremely unhappy about its life choices. His prismatic form had shifted to frequencies that probably violated several laws about acceptable light wavelengths, but nobody was in a position to file noise complaints. The battle reached its climax when the Kraken decided to stop playing around. It gathered itself into a configuration that hurt to perceive directly and opened what could only be described as a mouth. Not a physical mouth, you understand. More like a conceptual mouth that existed in the spaces between thoughts and had opinions about the continued existence of everyone in the arena. "It's trying to swallow local space-time," Thrix announced with the kind of scientific detachment that made Zentorians excellent under pressure. "If that thing finishes opening, it'll create a pocket dimension where physics work according to its preferences." "And our preferences?" Vera asked, still dancing between tentacles that phased in and out of existence. "Won't be consulted." The arena started stretching like reality was made of elastic and someone was testing its limits. Cadets who'd been standing next to each other suddenly found themselves separated by impossible distances. The emergency lighting began casting shadows that moved independently of their sources. That's when Vera made the kind of decision that explained why humans had survived long enough to reach the stars despite their complete inability to leave well enough alone. She charged directly at the Kraken's conceptual mouth. "That's the stupidest plan I've ever heard," Kane shouted, providing covering fire with bullets that shouldn't have been able to hit targets existing in multiple dimensions simultaneously. "I know," Vera shouted back. "That's why it might work." Her sword, now blazing with energy that made the arena's lighting look like a dying candle, met the edge of the Kraken's reality-eating mouth. The blade didn't just cut through the cosmic horror's attack, it sliced a hole in the fundamental structure of space-time, creating a wound in existence that looked suspiciously like a doorway, but not a doorway to somewhere else in this universe. A doorway back to wherever void Krakens came from when they weren't busy terrorizing galactic military academies. The Kraken took one look at the portal Vera had just carved in reality and made the universal expression of something that had just realized it was about to be sent to its room without dinner. It tried to back away, but physics, even the weird, flexible physics it was used to, don't work that way when someone's holding a sword that can edit the universe. The portal pulled the cosmic horror through with the sound of reality snapping back into its proper shape. The Kraken's final expression was one of profound annoyance, like it had been having a perfectly good day terrorizing primitive life forms and someone had just ruined it with advanced metallurgy. The portal snapped shut. The arena fell silent except for the sound of emergency systems trying to figure out what they were supposed to do when physics had been temporarily suspended and then resumed without filing proper paperwork. Vera's sword went back to looking like a normal, if extremely well-made, blade. "Well," she said, examining the weapon with new interest, "that was educational. The aftermath of a void Kraken attack, it turns out, involves a lot of paperwork. Galactic Military Academy regulations apparently covered damage to facilities during emergency situations. But nobody had written the forms for reality temporarily suspended due to eldritch horror and primitive weaponry. Station Nexus 7 now had a Kraken-shaped hole in its primary arena, several corridors that existed in colors the maintenance staff couldn't identify, and an emergency repair bill that would probably bankrupt a small solar system. But everyone was alive, which most insurance policies considered an acceptable outcome under the circumstances. The changes started immediately. First, the Academy quietly updated its curriculum to include pre-FTL combat techniques, which was bureaucratic speak for sword fighting and other primitive arts that apparently work when nothing else will. Commander Voss, whose crystalline form had gained some interesting new refractive properties after channeling ancient Earth metallurgy, was put in charge of the program. Modern warfare, he announced to the first class of revised combat training, his prismatic form now casting shadows that moved independently, requires modern solutions. But ancient warfare apparently requires solutions that work regardless of what the universe thinks about them. The other cadets, having witnessed Vera slice through both advanced armor and cosmic horror with equal efficiency, approached the new curriculum with the enthusiasm of beings who'd suddenly realized their assumptions about primitive technology might need revision. Kane became Vera's most enthusiastic convert. He'd shipped his family's entire collection of primitive curiosities to the Academy and was learning to use chemical explosive projectiles with the dedication of someone whose worldview had undergone emergency reconstruction. His first lesson in kinetic weapons went better than expected, mostly because he approached bullets with the same precision he'd once applied to plasma rifles. "You know what the difference is between a plasma bolt and a bullet?" he asked Vera during one of their practice sessions. "Enlighten me." "Plasma bolts require the target to cooperate with physics. Bullets just require the target to be there." Thrix had been promoted to tactical engineering after her improvised launcher proved that sometimes the best solutions involved throwing things really hard with mechanical advantage. Me. She spent her time designing weapons that combined ancient principles with modern materials, creating kinetic delivery systems that could function in any reality warping situation. The key. She explained to her new engineering students, all four hand-sketching diagrams that looked like they belonged in a museum of prehistoric warfare, is understanding that advanced doesn't always mean better. Sometimes it just means more complicated ways to accomplish what a sharp stick already does perfectly well. But the biggest change was in how other species looked at humans. Word got around, as word does in galactic civilization. The story of a human cadet with a primitive sword defeating both advanced technology and cosmic horror became the kind of tale that spread through space stations, military academies, and diplomatic corps with the speed of really good gossip. Suddenly, humans weren't just the weird species that insisted on bringing museum pieces to modern conflicts. They were the weird species that might actually know something about survival that everyone else had forgotten. Earth started receiving requests for cultural exchange programs focused on traditional combat techniques. Human military advisors found themselves in high demand for consultations on primitive technology integration. And somewhere in the galaxy's bureaucratic machinery, someone quietly added humans to the list of species you probably didn't want to fight unless you absolutely had to. Which brought us to the phone call. Vera finally got around to contacting her great-grandmother after 3 weeks of explaining to Academy officials why her family heirloom had been able to cut through both advanced armor and eldritch horror. The conversation was enlightening in ways that explained a lot about human survival instincts. "Oh, that old thing?" Great-Grandma Kozlov's voice crackled across several star systems with the cheerful tone of someone who'd been waiting for this call. "I was wondering when you'd figure out what it was really for." "You mean it's not just a family heirloom?" "Well, it is, but it's also something your great-great-grandfather requested when Earth made first contact. He was part of the initial diplomatic team. You know, smart man. Took one look at galactic civilization and said we needed weapons that would work no matter what weird alien nonsense we ran into." Vera stared at the sword, which was currently resting peacefully in its rack and showing no signs of its recent reality-cutting activities. "So this was specifically made to fight things like void krakens?" "Among other things. The metallurgy is interesting metals from Earth's core, folded using techniques that predate most galactic civilizations. Your great-great-grandfather worked with some very talented blacksmiths who understood that sometimes the old ways survive because they work when everything else fails. Why didn't anyone tell me?" Great-grandma's laugh was the sound of someone who'd lived through enough galactic politics to find most of it amusing. "Because you had to learn to use it as a sword first. The other properties only activate when wielded by someone who understands the blade, not just the weapon. Most humans never figure that out." "And the glowing? The reality cutting? Earth magic, dear. We just call it that because quantum metallurgical properties enhanced by focused human consciousness doesn't fit on family greeting cards." So there it was. Vera's family had been preparing for Galactic Military Academy for 6 generations, and nobody thought to mention it until after she'd used the sword to banish a cosmic horror back to whatever dimension it had crawled out of, which was, when you thought about it, perfectly typical of human planning. Prepare for everything, explain nothing, and let the next generation figure it out through trial and error. Usually very dramatic error involving tentacles and reality distortion. The Academy's final report on the incident was classified at levels that required security clearances most people couldn't spell. But the unofficial summary, passed around in whispers between cadets and instructors, was simpler. Human brought primitive weapon to advanced combat assessment. Primitive weapon cut through advanced technology like it was tissue paper. Cosmic horror attacked. Primitive weapon cut hole in reality. Human sent cosmic horror home to think about its life choices. Recommend updating definition of primitive. Here, and in the end, that's what really mattered. Not the paperwork or the policy changes or the diplomatic implications of humans carrying weapons that could edit the universe. Just the simple fact that sometimes when everything goes wrong and reality stops making sense, you want someone on your side who's carrying a really good sword and knows how to use it. Even if they won't tell you why until after you've figured it out the hard way. Because that's humans for you. Always prepared, never predictable, and absolutely guaranteed to solve problems in ways that make perfect sense only after you've watched them do it. Who knew? Knew.